Hi, in this lesson we're going to look at sections 2.4 Questionnaire Design and also section 2.5 Bias. So for questionnaire design, basically we will focus on different types of question styles and types of questions. As you're aware, when you're given a survey, you will notice that there are questions that ask for your, say, name, age, personal information, and these questions ask for very specific or exact answers. So these types of questions are known as closed questions because you will be giving a relatively short and an exact response. And these answers are easily analyzed, but because of the simplicity of these answers, the options presented may present bias, which we'll talk about later. And another type of question that you must have encountered would be open questions. For open questions, you are asked to give your opinion. You might be asked to describe something that you have seen. So technically, open questions are questions that offer you to give a wide variety of responses, and you will be answering in your own words. So you just need to be able to tell when you see an example of an open question versus a closed questions. And then when it comes to survey question types, we can look at information questions where it's very specific. You're providing basically information. So say a gender, and you just circle male and female, or when you provide your address, that's also giving information. In questionnaires and surveys, you will always also find checklist questions where you are allowed to pick more than one selection or one choice. So for example, which of the following sports do you enjoy watching? Sorry for the typo. So basketball, soccer, baseball, hockey, and if you like more than one of these sports, you can just check off more than one. And then ranking questions are the ones that give you some choices, and you have to rank them in a certain order. So ordering is involved in ranking questions. So rank the following in order of importance from 1 as most important to 4 less important: graduating, choosing career, getting summer job, and learning to drive. So this is an example of a ranking question. And then rating question, which sometimes looks similar to ranking questions, is the ones that ask you to actually just pick one response rather than ordering everything, even though it seems like there is an order to rating questions. How satisfied are you with the venue of the prom? Very satisfied, satisfied, dissatisfied, very dissatisfied. So you still kind of have to think about your own opinion before you answer a rating question, but in the end, you will just pick one response. So these are the different types of questions in terms of what you need to know. So on your quiz test, you will just be asked to identify the question type that's found in the question or the test. Okay, so let's move on to look at bias. So bias is inevitable in statistical studies, no matter how well designed your survey is, because bias, by definition, it's an unintended influence on a data gathering method. So no matter how careful you are, sometimes you will still end up with, a biased results. And there are actually different types of bias. So it's more important that you are aware of what they are and how you can avoid them or eliminate, or not totally eliminating, but at least try to minimize bias that results from a statistical study that you're trying to set up. So let's look at the different types of bias, and then we're going to look at some situations where you'll be asked to identify the types of bias that is found in each situation. So the first one is called sampling bias. Sometimes this is also known as selection bias. So sampling bias is basically when you are deciding how to approach your statistical research or collect your information. You will be choosing your method, and sampling bias comes from the fact that there is a flaw in the method chosen when the study is carried out. So when the chosen sample does not accurately represent the population, then we have a sampling bias. So an example for this is only people with cars and telephone were surveyed during the 1936 presidential election in the US. So we're talking about year 1936, and cars and telephone were considered luxury back in the days. So when people with cars and telephones were only these people were surveyed, chances are you are asking the rich, the wealthy, and of course you will not be able to get the full picture of the voters' support for their candidate, just because you're not asking probably the working people in the working class. So that's an example of sampling bias. And then we have non-response bias. We encounter this almost every single day. Like when you go shopping, on the receipt it says, oh, go onto this website and fill out a survey, and then you may be able to enter and win a $100 gift card. So non-response bias is based on the fact that when surveys are not returned, so only people who are interested in, say, getting the gift card or winning the gift card will respond, and chances are you're not going to be able to reach out to the entire population, or at least, a good sample, a balanced sample, a random sample of respondents. So this is non-response bias. And then thirdly, we have household bias. This is also known as coverage error, because household bias is based on is when one type of respondent is overrepresented or underrepresented because groupings of different sizes are polled equally. So a classic example would be if you want to conduct some survey about people in a town, only one people of any given household is sampled. But if you think carefully about this, not every single household has 2 people or has the same number of people living in. So some households might have 6 people, where the grandparents are living with, the parents and kids, and sometimes you have a single person living in one household. So you can see that larger households are not represented in proportion to smaller households per se. So in this case, the underrepresentation of large households may lead to a bias, may lead to a result that does not truly reflect the reality of the population in your sample. And last type of bias is called response bias. And response bias is when respondents give false answers or don't feel comfortable answering a question. So this may be due to the fact that the questions are poorly designed, and leading questions could be a very common mistake in questionnaire designs. And it could also be due to the role of the interviewer or the interviewer's tone and attitude. So for example, if a teacher just asks the students, do you study in a quiet space free of distractions? Well, the students will probably say they do, because they want to impress the teacher by saying that I'm very studious, and when I study, I just focus on my study rather than playing on my cell phone, texting my friends, listening to loud music that the students actually know is not useful, not helpful to help him or her to study. So this is an example of a response bias. So we have looked at the 4 different types. We have looked at what these 4 different types of biases are. So let's try to identify them in the following examples. So classify the type of bias in each of the following scenarios. Suggest how the survey process could be changed to eliminate or reduce the bias. So first of all, we have a survey asked students at a high school football game whether a fun or extracurricular activity should be used to buy new equipment for the football team or instruments for the school band. So you're at the football game, and it's most likely that students who are present will want to support the football team, even though you may have people from the band sitting on the stands. So sometimes it's very difficult to tell whether it's sampling bias or household bias for this reason, because You can also argue that, well, but at a football game, we are overrepresenting people who are interested in football, but we cannot eliminate the fact that there may be people from the band. So when you're asked to find the best or the type of bias that's best described or applied to the situation, you really have to think about it, and I think that in this case, it is still up to the surveyor to choose where to conduct their survey. So the fact that they have chosen to conduct a survey at the football game is flawed just because we already know right off the bat that, if they did not survey just at the football game, maybe outside a hall, in the front of the school, in the cafeteria, then they can eliminate this bias. So the answer to this will be a sampling bias. Okay, so B. A random poll asks the following question. The proposed casino will produce a number of jobs and economic activity in and around your city, and it will generate revenue for the provincial government. Are you in favor of this forward-thinking initiative? So the question is about the survey question itself. So if you think about sampling bias, household bias, non-response bias, and response bias, I think it's pretty obvious that this is a response bias, simply because the first big chunk of this question makes this leading question. And also when they include the word forward thinking, well, it's trying to encourage people to think that having the casino is a good thing. But they have not looked at the negative impact of having a casino in town. So as a result, this is an example of response bias because of these reasons. Okay, and then let's look at C. A science class asks every 5th student entering the cafeteria during all lunches to answer a survey on environmental issues and return the completed survey by the end of lunch. Well, if you ask people to fill out the survey and then they can always come back to you, give it back to you, what's the chance that these students will return the survey to you? So the answer here is non-response bias because they didn't really make it mandatory or people will feel bad for not returning a survey. So instead of asking people to return it at the end of lunch, simply sit down with them and fill out the survey and try to keep the survey short may also help with help in reducing the non-response bias. Okay, let's look at another example. A school principal wants to survey data management students to determine whether having computer internet access at home improves their success in a course. The principal interviews 4 students from each of the following mark categories: over 80%, 60 to 80%, and below 60%. Well, if you look carefully at these mark categories, over 80% means 80 to 100, so that's a 20% interval. 60 to 80% is also a 20% interval, but below 60% is more than 20. It's actually 3 times as wide. So that means that the group, and only 4 students are surveyed from each group, meaning that this is not stratified sampling. And so the students that fall into the mark category but below 60% are definitely underrepresented in this survey. Therefore, this is an example of household bias. So instead of doing this, the workaround to this to fix this bias is either to reorganize these mark categories by 20% using 20% intervals, or they can use stratified sampling so that more students will be surveyed from a larger group. And lastly, an aid agency in developed country wants to know that proportion of households have at least 1 personal computers. And in this example, we're actually looking at sampling bias again, because some households in a developing country may not have a phone, a personal computer. So you can use multi-stage sampling to reduce bias in this case.